Hello watercolor artists, my name is Ryan Fox and I'm a signature member of the American Watercolor Society based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And today I'm going to be checking out this new New York Central Watercolor paper that my local Jerry's Artarama carries. And we're going to see if this can handle what I do with paper, because I'm pretty tough with paper. I scrub, I do all kinds of crazy stuff with it. I scratch, I erase. We're just going to see if this works out. Usually I use arches and Stonehenge, but we're going to see if this is equally good today. In watercolor painting, paper is the absolute most important thing to have. You can have some cheap brushes, you can have cheap paints, but as long as you have good surface and a good paper to work with, you can get a good painting out of that. If you have cheap paper, you're just going to be fighting it the whole time. So that's why I want to test today to see if this stuff is good and if I would recommend this to my students or not. The first thing I want to do is I just want to see if the sizing is very good on this paper or not. So I'm going to take one sheet out of each package. This is the cold press. And this is the hot press. And we're just going to run this in water and just see what happens with the sizing. If the paper doesn't have very good sizing, you'll see weird dark marks in the sizing on the paper. If that happens with the watercolor paper, you generally don't want to paint on top of it. So let's stick this in the sink and see what happens here. Get this paper really, really wet. And then I'm going to let the excess just kind of drip off here on both sheets here. And then we'll get back in the studio to see if there's any marks that appear on the paper. Okay, now we're back in the studio, and that's the hot press, that's the cold press. What I'm looking for is dark marks on the paper, that indication that the sizing is not very good, and I'm not seeing that, so it passes the first test. How white this paper is. So I have a piece of white foam core here, which is about the whitest thing in the world that you can get, and I'm going to lay down the New York paper on that. And if you get close, you can see there's just a slight yellowish tint on this paper. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a sheet of arches next to that. The color actually compares very similarly between arches and New York paper. Look at it. The next thing I'm looking for is the texture on the paper. You can definitely see that this does have some texture right here. If you flip this over, there's less texture on this side. I think that this is probably considered the front side of the paper. I probably prefer to paint on the back side of the paper. I like a little bit more texture in my paper. What I do like about this paper is 9x12 sheets don't have a watermark, so you don't have to worry about that being upside down, your sky or backwards someplace. All right, my next little test is I'm going to take a strong staining color, and I wanted to see how long this paper, the paint stays wet on top of the paper. So I'm mixing up in the super dirty palette here. It's actually cleaner than usual. I'm mixing up a bunch of this blue. This is phthalo blue. And putting it down here. Big puddle of it. I'm gonna go back and grab some more of this color. So the New York paper is down here on the bottom. This is my arches paper. Put down some of this here also. And I'm just gonna let this sit and see how long this stuff stays wet to kind of compare these two. About 3.5 minutes, you can still see that the New York paper is still really, really wet. So is the arches paper. So I think I'm gonna use my hairdryer because these look pretty equal, the puddles, and dry these guys, and then we're gonna do some lifting here. All this work has made me hungry. It's time for chocolate. The next step is I'm gonna try to see if I can lift off some of this color from the paper. So I'm gonna take my flat brush, my 1/2-inch flat, and I'm going to get some water on the brush, clean water. And the goal is to just come into here and just go back and forth and back and forth. I want to see if this color lifts off or not. Now again, this is a staining color, so you're not going to get back to pure white, and then I'm just going to get that color mat and take a paper towel. You should have a complete clean one, not like the one I'm working on. And you can see here that we still have some color left where I scrubbed it a little bit, but that's okay. That is a staining color. It didn't damage the paper or destroy the paper. Next thing I'm going to test out, and this is super important for paper for me, is I want to see what happens when you put masking fluid on it. So I've got a little bit of the Pebeo here in this bottle. This is not a Pebeo bottle, but this is Pebeo masking fluid that I'm using. So I'm going to dip my brush in the Pebeo, go back over to my blue color, and I'm going to put down some of this. And then I'll extend it into the paper too. Actually, I'll just do just a little bit more. And then we have to let that dry. Now, I don't usually do this, but I just used a hairdryer on this, and it's like wait for this to dry for 10 minutes. So now I'm gonna come into here and see if this comes off the paper. So I use a lot of masking fluid when I paint. And if the paper surface is too soft, it tears the top of the paper. And you can see here that this the Pebeo masking fluid is coming off this paper really easily. And it's also coming off of the color too, and it's not lifting too much of the color. The masking fluid is always going to pull off a little bit of the color. You just have to expect that. But the super important test was that it just didn't tear the paper. And that was with the Pebeo brand, even though it's in the wrong bottle. And it also didn't stain the paper either. Sometimes masking fluid can stain the paper, but that's more of the masking fluid's fault, not the paper's. In the last video, I dropped some water down into here to get some blossoming effects. Phthalo blue is a really great blossoming color while it's still wet. And yeah, it did pretty much the same effect I get on the other papers I'm used to. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down some blue tape, painter's tape. This, of course, is completely dry. And this is another big test of this paper to see if it can handle this. And I'll put that blue tape, painter's tape, burnish it so water can't get underneath it. And then take a Mr. Clean magic eraser, and this literally is just like a 3000 grit sandpaper, and erase the color. Now you should really dry this before you take the tape off. This almost gets you back to pure white paper, and this is a pretty strong stain color. And yeah, the paper held up pretty well. You can see it does shave off a little bit. That happens with all the papers because literally you're just erasing the color off the paper. Whew, that was exhausting. I don't know how you guys feel. Well, I'm pretty happy with this paper. Based on all the tests we've done, we checked to see if it worked with masking fluid. We tried to erase some of the color, lifting off the color. We used a magic eraser to actually erase the color off of it and didn't destroy the paper. So far, it's completely held up. Like, I'm super happy with this paper. The next test, of course, is going to be to actually do a real watercolor painting and see what happens with it. But so far, I'm very encouraged by this.